Welcome back to the Rally Room. I'm your host, Emiliana Guereca. It is Wednesday, and by the time you listen to this, it would have been Friday. It will be Friday. So welcome back to the Rally Room. This is the space where we just don't talk about what's happening. We talk about what we are going to do about it. And today we're doing something a little bit different and a little bit different based on the DMs, the emails, the text messages that folks have been sending. They're coming in fast. So I condensed them all into this episode we are calling You Asked. We are answering. So keep the questions coming, keep the comments coming. And I will try my best to answer the questions. So yes, this is Coachella weekend coming up. So if you are out there, make sure you are listening to the podcast of You Asked, We Answered in the Rally Room. So one of the big questions is, why are we still marching? Is this podcast just anti-Trump? Why are we at war, and who are we at war with? Are they lying to us? And what can we actually do? So those are the questions that I'm going to attempt to answer. Since we planned this episode, things have escalated, as we all know. Pam Bondi was fired. We are in a war with Iran, active conflict. So there is currently a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, but let's be clear, it's not peace. It's a pause, a slight pause. 2 weeks is really nothing. And as we look at it, who's winning? Most people will say, well, yes, Iran is winning. Iran won, United States 0. But the reality is that no one's winning. No one is winning. It's war. No one wins at war. So not civilians, not democracy, definitely not Americans at this point. So we're all losing. So I'll start with that. So let's get into it and let's continue with it. So why are we still marching? Well, we're still marching. If you marched on No Kings and you're continuing to march across the country, across the globe, really we're marching because nothing is fully resolved. Reproductive rights are not back. There is no equal pay. There is no protection for violence. There is no fair representation in the current democracy. As we know, Roe fell in 2022. Currently, we are having voting rights attacked. And when we talk about voting rights attacked, we are talking about the ID stipulations that they want. We currently, in the state of California, we have a sheriff that has seized ballots from 2025 claiming voter fraud. We've got the president of the United States talking about voter IDs and the supposed voter fraud from 2020. So really, we are not in a great state for democracy. And so that's why we continue to march. And unless we are out there showing that we disapprove of what is happening and that we are continuing to advocate for better conditions, that's why we're still marching. So marching is never the end goal, as we all know. But the escalation of cruelty has escalated. I mean, we still haven't figured out what is going to happen to ICE. It is still currently being funded. I know TSA is currently funded, right? Communities are being militarized. ICE is still out there rogue. And at this point, ICE should be going to fight in Iran since they want to be rogue and they have the funding. That's who should be going. But that's my personal opinion. We still have books banned. We still have a dismantling of DEI. We still have an attack on women's rights and their leadership. So we're not done marching. We've got to continue. We know that rights are not given. Marching is an entry point to activism. So to the millions of folks that go out there and march, we say thank you, because we're here, we're watching, we're not going anywhere, but we're marching. You're not marching alone, and we know that march is not enough, but it does spark organizing from people. It does spark a worldview of you're not alone. Listen, the Vietnam War was truly stopped by people taking a stand and continuing to march in the streets. Once people saw what was happening in Vietnam, there is no way that our conscience could allow us to continue to say yes to a war that was not winnable, but a war that was sending an insane amount of numbers. We're sending Black men to fight while they were fighting for democracy and the right to vote in the United States. So imagine how what the country was saying, we are going to go fight in Vietnam for democracy, while folks in the United States did not fully have rights to vote, right? So that's why we continue to march, because it continues to clearly strategize at organizing, but it clearly presents the numbers around the globe of people taking to the streets. So that's why we're going to continue to march. And from our perspective, my perspective, we will continue to march until we are equal. As of now, women are not equal, fully represented. Equal Rights Amendment has not passed. We are not mentioned in the Constitution. And the only thing it mentions is 19th Amendment, which is voting rights to women. But realistically, we're not equal. So marching until equal. All right, that brings me to my next point. I have an awful lot of message about why is this podcast completely anti-Trump? No, it is not completely anti-Trump. We are talking about policies that impact women, democracy, and our lives. And unfortunately, we have a president that believes in not being fully transparent. We have a president that does not believe that women are equal, that talks down to women, that degrades women, that is okay with women not having equal rights, but also has surrounded himself with an administration that truly believes the same thing. I mean, we are talking about him surrounding himself with Pete Hegseth, who believes that women should bow down to their man. We've got Stephen Miller, who fully thinks and wants to continue to talk about who belongs and birthright citizenship, right? And then we have him also talking about voting rights for women. It should be the men that would vote. So it's about power. It's not just, this isn't an anti Trump. It is not an anti Trump, but it is talking about the executive overreach, the voting restrictions, the culture wars that the president has inflicted on everyone. So let's be clear. The president's leadership has been chaotic, it's reactive, it's unhinged. And so when we talk about that, it isn't necessarily being just anti Trump. It's about talking about what is happening in real time to us women, but to folks around the country. So it isn't anti anyone. It is more about talking about the leadership in which we find ourselves in, or the lack of leadership when we do not see any action from the Democratic Party, when we do not see action from some of our elected. So it isn't anti anyone. It is truly talking about what is happening in real time. When we think about that, we think about ICE. When we think about the TSA workers. We think about the government shutdowns. We think about how the women are getting fired in the White House. We think about how women are being spoken to, right? Um, for the first time in 70 years, the United States has not signed on to the UN Commission of Women. Why? Because it says that they don't like the gender ideology that's speaking about women being equal. It is not what they are going to sign on to. So this is serious. This isn't about an anti Trump podcast or anti Trump anything. We are pro democracy, pro transparency, pro women. And if the administration is going to continue to be anti all of that, then we're going to talk about it. But more than anything, we are going to do something about it, which is continuing to vote them out, continuing to protest, continuing to show up at their doorsteps, continuing to call the White House switchboard. So That's what we're doing. I have a ton of messages of why are we at war? Are we at war in Iran? So realistically, we are at war with Iran. We're already there. There has been military escalations. However, this has been only done through the president, and it was never consulted with Congress. So the U.S. involvement is happening. As we know, we're currently in a 2-week ceasefire, which is nothing at this point. That was a day ago with the ceasefire, which now Iran is saying that the United States has not followed through because Lebanon has been bombed by Israel. So realistically, yes, we are at war, but there's a lot we're not being told, right? There's a lot not we're not being told that Congress hasn't approved this. Why? Because the United States president, Mr. Trump, did not go to Congress to declare war. He took it upon himself on Truth Social, his social media company, to announce what he was doing, right? So, but under the Constitution, it's Congress that declares war, but we have a lawless president. So we're engaged in a war and there is no strategy. And that's the problem. There is no strategy. There is no resolution. There's a pause in the escalation. We should we should say the quiet part out loud is that there is no clear win for the United States. The region is unstable. Tensions are rising. So who's winning? Not the United States, and most definitely not Iran. So there is no winning for the president. There's been a pause, but there's no winning for the people. It is women and children that will end up suffering all of this. I know that in the United States, there's talk about will will our children be asked to join the war? Will they be drafted? And let's be clear here. Now they've extended the age into 42. So who should go and fight this war? Who should go are Donald Trump's kids. Who should go is ICE. Not my kids. I don't think so. We didn't sign up for this. They did not even consult Congress to go to war. This is a lawless president that thinks that the rules do not apply to him, his kids, or anyone around him. So if you want to send people to war, send ICE. You're clearly funding them. Send your own children, send Barron Trump, send all the Trump's kids out to fight the war that he started without consulting Congress. So I'll say that. So if you've signed up for ICE, get prepared to get sent to war because you are the ones that should be going. So that concludes that portion. And we're not winning. There is no one that winning. This is no different than when we went to Vietnam. There was no clear strategy. McNamara at that point was lying to the president. And so now our McNamara is actually Pete Hegseth, who has no business being out there in the Department of War. It's an unhinged war. It's unnecessary. There is no winning. We need to back out of that. The Strait of Hormuz, as they have said, has opened for a little while as the 2 week ceasefire is on, which Iran states has been breached because Israel has bombed Lebanon. So again, we are back to the same point of a war with no strategy and no winning. So yes, we are at war. Congress was not notified to approve this. So hope that helps with that question. The other question is the government lying to us? Are they lying to us? What do you think? Of course, they're lying to us. What we know is that information is being withheld. The timelines don't add up. The decisions around it have zero to no transparency. I mean, have minimum transparency. The Vice President J.D. Vance can't get his story straight about war. President Trump can't get his story straight. They're talking about we're in talks with Iran. And then all of a sudden, Iran says, no, we're not. We're not. And then there's, well, Pakistan may help us get into talks with Iran. Wait, you're either in talks or you're not. So are they lying to us? Absolutely. I think they're gaslighting us, not just lying to us, right? So we can't sit here and trust this current administration. So when trust breaks, democracy cannot function without trust. We cannot ask our constituents, our folks to trust us when we continuously break trust with people. So none of it adds up. But also gaslighting us as to the unemployment isn't out there. Gas prices are not as high as we are all saying. And most of the country, a gallon of gas is more than $4. I Today I put gas in my car. I paid $7.15 per gallon in California. Midwest, you're paying $4 to $5 a gallon. So this is what happens when we get into war. The stock markets crash, right? It may have rallied a little bit as we had talks of a ceasefire, but gas hasn't gone down. Groceries haven't gone down. Unemployment, there are so many people unemployed. And no matter where you live in the country, the homeless population seems to be everywhere because of affordable housing. So again, are they lying to us? Absolutely. I think it's worse than that. I think that they are gaslighting us and they think we don't know. We do know. We know that we are being lied to. We know that we are being gaslit. So I hope that answers that question. And we all know at this point that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, was fired. She was fired as questions around Epstein kept coming up. She was fired around releasing of more files. And again, remember, she was the Attorney General in Florida when Epstein got that really light sentence. So it's not random. It's not random that she was fired. It's about timing because accountability, in my opinion, was getting too close to the president. So all of a sudden, they get fired, they get reassigned. And so the real question about are they lying? Absolutely. Unfortunately for Pam Bondi, the way that they spoke about it was that she is going to be working in the private sector, also known as she's fired, not reassigned the way Christy Nome was reassigned. Christy Nome was reassigned, so not necessarily fired, sort of leveled up into a different position that was not as forward facing as she was with the Department of Homeland Security. But obviously she is kept on because there's something about her cruelty that they like. So we'll talk about that. Pam Bondi, unfortunately for her, they just said that she will be working in the public sector. Good luck finding a job after you have worked for this administration and continuously lied for this administration. But more than that, as the Department of Justice have said, they will continue to investigate. So we'll see what happens there. Are they lying? Absolutely. They are gaslighting us. So I'm going to move into the next question. So the other big question is around what should we be watching for in terms of voting? So between all of the different questions, is vote by mail going away was one of the critical questions I was asked. And this one in particular was interesting because the emails and the DMs that we received were from folks in either the Midwest or the East Coast around rural voting and the vote by mail, which is interesting because they are trying to restrict mail in voting, even though the President of the United States, his wife Melania Trump, and his son Barron Trump all voted by mail, and they have said they voted by mail, but now all of a sudden they cannot trust it for the rest of us. So what's good for them is not good for us. As you can see, this is why they're trying to restrict mail-in voting. They're also talking about creating voter lists, federal voter lists, and realistically, it's to add barriers to voting in the name of security. In the name of security, they are adding barriers to voting. We don't think that it's going to happen. It's been proven that there is no widespread fraud. It's been proven that there isn't, but this is a pattern This is a pattern for the president where he just continues to spread these lies about voter fraud and stolen elections. Do you remember Stop the Steal? No one was stealing anything. What he should be talking about is the attempted coup that he tried to put forth, to the point of threatening his own vice president at the time, Mike Pence. So when we talk about barriers to voting and who it impacts, we know that it impacts women. We know that it impacts working families, communities of color. So we know that if voting gets harder, folks will not show up. So it's not by accident, it's a strategy. I know I vote by mail because it's easier. I look through my ballot, who's up for reelection, who is, going to be a representative that represents my values in local, state, and federal elections. And so we clearly know and understand that it is a tactic and a strategy for voter suppression. Don't fall for it. As of now, vote by mail is still on, but we're going to keep an eye on it because we do think that that's what they are trying to stop, which clearly really affects rural folks. It affects women. It affects everyone. Once you get busy, if you don't have time to actually show up to the polling place with your ID and whatever restrictions they want to put on, it will create barriers and people will not show up. So I do think that we've got to keep an eye on that. We've got to continue contacting Congress and Senate to make sure that this does not move forward with voter IDs and all of that, because the lie that there is voter fraud is simply that, a lie. It is not true. All right. So that brings me into DEI. Woo. We have a ton of questions around DEI. What does it mean that they dismantled it? Why was diversity, equity, and inclusion targeted? But what is it really? Realistically, they targeted DEI and DEI language, diversity, equity, inclusion, is because it forces them to look at what equal access looks like, fair hiring, fair representation, but it also looks at women. That was one of the languages that was stricken from a lot of the hiring processes. And when they talked about DEI, it was clearly aimed at women. It was aimed at representation around the issue of gender. And what we know is that when they originally came up with the affirmative action, studies have shown that who really benefited from affirmative action, from diversity, equity, and inclusion is women. Because when we talk about fair representation and equal pay, we know that affects women, the upward mobility. So when we talk about them dismantling DEI, it really is about cutting the legs off of upward mobility for women. That's what it is. Some feel like we're not losing it. It's just they're just saying that it shouldn't be unbalanced, but realistically, women are not equal. We are still not getting equal pay, so there is an unbalance. So saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion should not include women, should have never included women. My question is, why not? Why not? Why should diversity, equity, and inclusion not include women? Why is it being dismantled? Why? Because we are too close to really getting to equal. And instead, we have backtracked and we're now decades behind again with no bodily autonomy. Again, no equal rights amendment passed. So the dismantling of DEI truly affects women of color the most. And we've got to continue to fight back on it. Remember, just recently there was a lawsuit around a company that hosted a women's networking event. There was a white male that complained that he felt left out and there's a lawsuit. Realistically, no one is talking about how women have been left out for the entirety of everything. We've had 9 male justices. We've never had 9 female justices. We've never had a female president, right? So no one is suing around this. We are out there advocating to continue to talk and work through diversity, equity, and inclusion to include women. What a concept. But I'll get off that soapbox. All right. And then the other question, and I'm going to cut it close because I am out of time. But one of the questions is who should run in 2028? How are we going to do this? Who should run in 2028? And I'm going to say, may the best woman win in 2028 because we've got to continue to fight back on the inequality that is happening. We've got to continue to advocate for less global conflict, no war, and women should be taking over at this point. At this point, we have not had a female president. We've had wars, global conflict, we've had inequality, racism, everything you can name has been put forth by men. So it's time for women to take over the world. Yes, as decision makers, as presidents, as global leaders, that's who should be running in 2028. Realistically, who should be running in 2028 is a candidate that truly fights for the people, not just a Republican, not just a Democrat, but that supports equal rights for all. So, thank you for joining me. I'm Emiliana Guereca in the Rally Room. If you like this episode, share, subscribe, keep the questions coming. If this moment feels chaotic, it's on purpose. It is on purpose. It is about making us feel unstable. But really, really, it's about a system trying to protect itself, trying to protect their power. Don't let them. All right. So join us next week for the Rally Room. Share, click like on the episode, and we will talk to you soon. I'm Emiliana Guereca in the Rally Room. Thank you for joining me.